You're listening to The Rant with David King.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by go. You know the thing.
Doggy do on his shoes.
Billy's dad is a fudge packer.
Millions, as you witness, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead.
I've been saying it. I've been saying it for 10 damn years. Ain't I been saying it, Miguel? Huh? I've been saying it.
Welcome to The Rant. I'm your host, David King. It is good to be here on this Monday, January 31st, in a new year, new you, 2022. Wrapping it up. I know. It's good to be back. It's good to be here. I apologize again for all the being away. I was sick. You know the story if you listened to the last episode. Sorry, I like the intro song, so I let it run a little long today. I really don't, You can say what you want. I don't care. New year, new you, 2022. And we talked a little bit about diet. We talked a little bit about foods to avoid. This, that, and the other. Dieting is a big one. Everybody wants to go on a diet. They get a gym membership. They kind of do it for a few months and then they taper off. I truly do believe the NSNG diet's the only thing that you can do that's going to be sustainable in terms of food, in terms of actually doing something to better yourself and making, long-term commitments. And when I say long-term, I mean lifetime commitments, right? Because you think to yourself, ooh, I want to go on a diet. This is what you should think about. You want to go on a diet. Maybe you want to lose weight. Maybe you want to be healthier. Maybe you're not morbidly obese, but you want to be healthier. So you go on a diet. And everybody doesn't think long term. They think, well, I just want something that's going to work. I want something that's going to be convenient. And that's fine. But long term is important because if you're doing something to lose weight, eventually it needs to be something that's adaptable in your lifestyle. You can't simply starve yourself. You can't simply go on a system where you're counting calories or you have points and you got to do this, because at the end of the day, we're people. And at the end of the day, we're busy. We may have children. We got full-time jobs. We've got all kinds of things that we have to deal with throughout our daily lives. And so what eventually happens is one day you're busy, you're working late, and you say, I don't have time to cook. I'm hungry. I'm just going to settle for whatever is out in town. And then that kind of turns into a snowball effect to where you're just back at your old diet. And so the key to this should be not necessarily, the first thing you need to do is you need to lay out what you want to do. So you should say, these are my goals. I want to lose weight. I want to feel better. I want to get in shape, right? May not be all three things, maybe one of those three things or whatever it might be. And some of those may be more important than others. But nonetheless, you want to figure it out. And then you have to look at it and go, okay, well, how can I do that? Well, I know how I can get in shape. I just go to the gym. So that's easy enough. And I know what I need to do to feel better. Maybe it's take a multivitamin, get outside more, get some sunshine, things like that. And inadvertently, by going to the gym, you'll feel better. And then, of course, the other variation, which is I want to lose weight, that'll help you feel better too. Maybe feeling better means you do some chores around the house. You say, I'm going to be more organized this year. I'm going to organize my life. I'm going to make the bed every morning. That isn't something you should write off. That's a big deal. I mean, if you wake up every morning and you make your bed, you've already accomplished something first thing in the day. And for a lot of people, that can be a really big deal. So don't write that off. It sounds simple, but hey, it could be profoundly beneficial to your mental health. So don't write it off. And so you make plans for all these things. You say, well, if I'm going to make my bed every morning, what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to get up, and before I do anything else, I'm going to make my bed. I'm going to fold my bed this way. I'm going to pull my sheets over, blah, blah, blah. That's pretty easy, right? You've come up with a plan. Maybe your plan is like what my wife's been doing. She bought a planner. It's a fantastic little thing that she got herself. And this planner comes with things that she has to do around the house each day. Little tasks. And they're small tasks, but they add up to be big over time. And as she does these things more, they become easier and easier to where she can keep up with it better. And then, of course, I help out too. It's not all on her to do it, but it's interesting and it's kind of fun to watch how just this little planner has changed so much. And she's been doing it since the new year. And it's pretty cool. And one of the things she does is she unloads the dishwasher in the morning and make sure that in the morning, now that the dishwasher is empty, all your dirty dishes, instead of going into the sink, they just go right into the dishwasher. And that seems like, oh, okay, well, that's easy. And it is. But you know what? That's a little thing you can do that just makes your life easier throughout the day, instead of dishes piling up in the sink and it becoming this monumental task in your brain. It's now much more manageable, and it's one less thing you have to worry about, and it de-stresses you. So it's just like these little things that you can do that are just so simple. Make your bed, take the clean dishes out in the morning. And then that way throughout the rest of the day, you put the dirty dishes in, and it just is so much easier to deal with, right? Keep up with it. And so that's a really cool little thing. And then of course you go into the weight loss. Well, what can you do that's sustainable in weight loss? Well, you can count calories, you can track points, you can do all these things. And for some people that works really well. But what ends up happening for the majority of Americans is it becomes a daunting task. It's hard to keep up with all of that while you're trying to keep up with everything else. And you'll find that it's hard enough to eat healthy in America, period. Everything is laced with sugar and processed oils and God knows whatever else, that it's really hard to just eat healthy, period. There's more fast food restaurants, I guarantee it, in your city than there are healthy places to go eat a normal meal, like a steak or chicken or something like that. So anyway, what do? You got to find something sustainable. And I truly believe into my core, the easiest thing that you can do that is easy to manage. It's not guaranteed. It's still difficult at times. It can be challenging, but it's much more sustainable because there's none of this counting this and that and tracking this. You eat what you want to eat. You eat as much as you want to eat, but you just don't eat sugar and grain. You cut out all the carbs, you cut out all the sugar, and you focus on eating a high fat. And when I say high fat, I generally mean saturated fat. So that's animal fat, that's dairy, those sorts of things, cheeses, in terms of dairy. That's what I mean by high fat. So you get plenty of fat. Your body needs that. It'll break it down into energy very quickly, especially if you're doing this diet strictly, you're staying away from the sugar and grain. That fat you ingest will immediately be turned into energy. You'll feel good. You'll go throughout the day. And then you want high protein. So you want to eat lots of meat. You want your vegetables. You can have fruit if you want to have fruit. The NSNG diet says stay away from fruit except for cherries and berries. I don't follow the fruit thing because I don't eat enough fruit per matter. But if you're type 2 diabetic and you're trying to reverse it, this may be a thing where you stay away from fruit altogether. Anyway, but it's that simple. You avoid sugar, you avoid carbs, and then you go high on the fat and the protein. You'll lose weight. You'll feel better. You'll have energy. And as if you're going to the gym too, that'll also help give you more energy, because as you work out and you get in shape, your body will produce, it produces endorphins, but it does a lot of other things where you become more energetic. So it's a much easier thing to do, because you don't have to worry about, oh, if I have a cup of this, well, then I can have a pound of that. And then if I have a pound of that, well, then I can subtract this to do this. It's ridiculous. And then when you've reached your goal, like for me, I'm down to 185 pounds. That's a good place for me to be at. I don't need to lose any more weight. I'm very happy to be in that location. Now I'm going to focus on getting healthy. I don't want to be skinny fat, as we used to say in the Marine Corps. I want to go exercise and feel good, but I'm down to 185 pounds. Whatever your goal weight would be, that's what you should try to get to. And then once you're there, you can have cheat days. You can say, well, you know what? Today I'm going to have a piece of cake. And you don't have to feel guilty about it, because you're not counting this, counting that, starving yourself today so you can eat tomorrow and all this nonsense. You're eating what you want to eat. You feel great. You look good. You've lost the weight. And you know what? You say, it's Friday night. I'm out with my significant other. I'm having a good time. We're drinking some wine. And you know what? I want to have a piece of cheesecake. You can have a piece of cheesecake, and you don't have to feel bad about it. And the fact that your body is already in this mode of like, hey, I'm processing, my metabolism is up because I'm working out. My metabolism is changing because I'm in a state of ketosis. It's not going to throw you off that much to have that little cheat. You're not going to like blow up the next day. Don't do it consecutively. You know what I mean? Like, don't go like a week straight of eating nothing but junk food, but you can have your days where you don't have to feel guilty about it. And to me, that's more sustainable. Maybe I'm wrong. You can let me know. You can hit me up on my email, Davidking.therant@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on social media. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's a diet out there that you're doing that's worked really well for you and it's a little more sustainable. To me, that's long-term. That's what you need. You need something that you can live with. And punishing yourself, anything that punishes you or restricts you in such a way where you can't even have the things that you're normally allowed to eat, such as meat and vegetables, that becomes problematic to me. But anyway, oh gosh, I'll get off of that. That's part of it. And then one of the new things that I want to get onto in this final week, it's January 31st. So we're wrapping up the new year, new you in 2022. I was going to do more on this, but I got sick, so I couldn't do it. But stupid COVID. Anyway, one of the things that I want to start doing this year, and I think it'll be really fun, is I want to do like a book of the month. And what that is basically I'm going to kind of focus in and hone in on a book that I think that I enjoyed and that I think you would enjoy. And one of the things that I think kind of ties in with this new you in 2022 is a great book that I read. I've been following this gentleman since early last year. I kind of stumbled across him. I'm kind of one of those guys that it's nothing new. This is somebody that's been in the scene for probably 4 years now, but now here I am just getting to the game and discovering him and, you know, what have you. So some of you who are listening may know who this person is. And, but I discovered him over the summertime. I didn't know who he was, but I was very interested in, the things that he had to say and some of the information he was giving out. And one of the things that I never would have thought that I would be interested in, which was psychology, but I found myself fascinated by it. Because there's a science behind a lot of things, and there's kind of a rhythm in a method to the madness of how we live our lives. And it's fascinating to see how we've kind of broken it down. The gentleman that I've discovered, his name is Jordan B. Peterson. And the book that I am recommending for February is 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. This book I'm just about to wrap it up on the very last chapter. This book is one of the best books I've ever read. And that says a lot because I've read a lot of books, but beyond that, some of the rules, I'm going to read off what the rules are. And I'm going to read some bits and pieces of the chapters of these books just to kind of give you an idea and just read some of the stuff that I thought stood out to me. I would really love to read the full chapters to you, but it would probably take too long. But just to give you kind of an idea of what this book is about, what's in it, and some of the things that he touches on, and how I think it's very profound and yet so simple. It's nothing, this isn't rocket science. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier last week, which is we tend to overcomplicate things, especially when it comes to the way we eat and the way we live our life, that oftentimes it's the simple things that are the right thing to do. It's the most simple answer. It's like we always want the most complicated and, convoluted way because we think that must be the proper way to do it. But really, sometimes it's just the easy way to do it. The simple, straight and narrow path, man. And sometimes we don't like that because maybe it's not the way we want to do it. But nonetheless, more often than not, that is the case. So, one moment here. Still getting my voice back. So who's Jordan B. Peterson? Jordan B. Peterson is a clinical psychologist and a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto. Actually, reading his blog, he is no longer a tenured professor at Toronto. He resigned from that position. There's a big thing last week. He resigned from that position because, well, quite frankly, he feels that the universities are becoming he didn't say this. This is my lack of a better term. The universities have become so woke and so progressive to the point where, what have we've been hearing? We've been hearing that universities are choosing people who are not qualified to be in that college, say places like Harvard or Yale, are choosing students based solely on their ethnicity and not their qualifications. Meanwhile, leaving out people who are qualified, who have met the criteria of the level of education to be in that school, they are being denied, while others are being let in simply because of their race. On the surface level, that may seem fine, but deep down, these kids that are going to these universities who have really no business being there because, quite frankly, they don't meet the academic standards of that university, they end up being admitted because of their race, but they're not to that level yet. And so what happens is they go there and they struggle significantly, and they don't get a very good education. They end up flunking out, and that does a lot to you psychologically. Listen, if you go to a college, think about this. You're a kid. Maybe you're not that smart, or maybe you don't think you're very smart. And maybe you've had, pretty average grades or below average grades. And maybe you grew up in a great household, but maybe you didn't grow up in a good household. Who knows? But now all of a sudden you've gotten this opportunity of a lifetime. You're at a prestigious university such as Harvard or Yale, someplace that you never thought you would go. And realistically on paper, you shouldn't be there, but nonetheless, you're there and it's a great opportunity. Well, you're already set up for failure because you're going to an institution with an academic standard way beyond your level. You may not realize that because you got in, so you must be there. You should be there, right? They let you in. And so then what ends up happening? You flunk out. Well, that can have some serious psychological repercussions on you. That's a huge fail. And you have maybe these little micro failures all the way up through that process, all the way up through high school and middle school. And as your childhood is progressing, you have all these little things that have been beating you down because maybe you come from a certain family or a low income family, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you came from a great family, was filthy rich. You're just, not, to that academic standard. Nonetheless, this could be a huge punch in the gut to you. And who knows what kind of effect that would have on that person's life. We really need to, if we want people of all ethnicities and races to go to these higher levels of learning, such as Harvard and Yale, I use them as an example just because they're the more obvious examples. If we want people or more people to go to these college institutions, we really need to step our game up in public schools. And I go back to school of choice. It just makes sense. If the school's no good, the parents should be allowed to take their kid out of that school and put them somewhere better. It's simple as that. And so we need to invest a better education pre-college for those kids so that they don't go there and then they flunk out. But I digress. That's just one of the things he's getting onto. And that's from my perspective, more or less than his, but he is finding out that the people that are the college professors are not interested in teaching so much they're interested in basically indoctrinating. They have an agenda they want to push. There's really no discussion in the classroom anymore. There's no, free thought. It's beginning to be very tyrannical. And so because of those reasons, he stepped away. And he's been talking about it for many years, the problems with the university. It's nothing new. If you've listened to any of his podcasts or you've heard anything he's ever had to say, you'll know that, he's had a huge beef with the universities for a while. They're going to a very bad place. And so he's no longer there. But anywho, back onto where I was. So he was the tenured professor at University of Toronto. From 1993 to 1998, he served as an assistant and then associate professor of psychology at Harvard. He spent 15 years writing Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. Maps of Meaning is a scholarly investigation into the nature of narrative and religious thought and structure of perception, the regulation of emotion, and the motivation of atrocity in the service of ideology. Dr. Peterson also penned the popular global bestsellers Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, and of course the book we're going to talk about today, 12 Rules of Life, An Antidote to Chaos. The number one nonfiction in 2018 in US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Netherlands, Brazil, Norway, both translated into some 50 languages. The later book was sold more than 5 million copies, and the former released in mid-2021 with 750,000 copies. So this guy's done a lot. Anybody who knows him will tell you that he is a genius in more than just psychology. It's fascinating to hear what he has to say about the Bible. He's not, when he talks about the Bible, although I would say that's changing a little bit more now because he's essentially found God not long ago. But when he talks about the Bible, he does it from more of a psychology standpoint. That's one of the things from the Maps of Meaning, which he looks at it from a different perspective than, say, what a pastor would. And it's not to say that it's wrong. It's just showing you how should I put this? It's showing you maybe something that you wouldn't normally see when you read it yourself or if you're in church. And that's important because what it's doing is it's nothing that's bad. What it's doing is it's reaffirming the seriousness and the truth of the Bible. And one of the things that he'll tell you is that, this book is more than true. It's beyond true. Like truth doesn't even scratch the surface of what the Bible is. And he has such a very great way of articulating that. And so I would recommend, if you have time, to go on YouTube or go to his website, jordanpeterson.com. I believe that is the website. Let's click over here and find out. Yes, jordanpeterson.com. And look into what he has. He's got his YouTube, his books, his podcast, blog, translations, blah, 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 blah. He even has some courses you can take on there. Pretty good stuff. So let's talk the book. 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. So what is an antidote to chaos? Well, you may say it's kind of a self-help book, but it's not really a self-help book, although it could be considered that. This is more or less a book where you can read this and it can dramatically change your life in such a positive way. And if not dramatically, certainly open your eyes to things that you would probably not have thought of before. The funny thing is, as we're adults, and as we get older, I'm 33. As we get older, we tend to want to believe in our brain that we have it all figured out. And as we get older, the one thing that we definitely learn is that we never really ever had it all figured out. And when we're old and we're in our 60s and 70s and we've heard our grandparents say it, they'll go, oh, I remember when I was your age and I thought I knew everything. And boy, how times fly. And if only I knew what I know now then when I was your age. And the truth of the matter is, as adults, we really don't have it figured out. And we don't know everything. And we don't always have the answers. And we don't always have the best political positions. Or we don't always have the answer to how we should figure out Medicaid or Medicare, or, how to, end world starvation or hunger or whatever. We don't have these answers. We like to pretend that we do. It's funny. You always see the people on the street that kind of get asked questions by those shows. Sometimes they're on Fox or, Jimmy Kimmel or something. Someone goes on the street and asks somebody a question, and it's an easy question. It's a question that you should get 9 times out of 10. But for some reason, this person just draws a blank, and then they make up some ridiculous BS. It's like, what? It's like, what are you doing, man? Are you trying to sound smart? Just tell them you don't know or walk away. But as people, we don't like to admit that we don't know. We want to come up with, we like to have a position. And as adults, we like to think we have it figured out. But the reality of it is we don't have it figured out. And we need to continue to learn. Just because you've graduated from college, or maybe you're the owner of a company, or you're the president and CEO of an organization, you're at the very top, you got the corner office, you've made it. Or maybe you're retired. You're never going to stop learning. You should never want to stop learning. You should continuously strive to learn more and more. And maybe it's no longer you can learn anything about your trade or what you do for a living. Maybe you've mastered that. Well, that's fine. Set new goals. Learn something else. Pick up a hobby. But one thing we should always do is always strive to improve ourselves. We should never just feel like we've made it and we are the best that we can possibly be as a person. We should always continue to try to be a little bit better and understand where we've failed and where we've come up short, and try to improve ourselves. And then on top of that, we should try to do some things that would help us get in front of potential flops, especially in terms of things like marriage or work relationships or being at work. How can we navigate this new world we're in? How can we best communicate? How can we communicate to people at work and be professional and expel or kind of project leadership and confidence onto those who work around you, or at least competence, right? We all want to seem competent. And then on top of that, how can we communicate with our spouses in such a way where they understand what we're saying? They understand what our problems are. They understand where, hey, I don't like what you're doing. This is what I wish we could do better, to avoid conflict. I think this book right here covers quite a bit of that. The 12 Rules of Life, it's going to help you be a better person in those areas of your life, because it's going to teach you how to conduct and how to act in such a way. Not in so much that you're scripted, but just something to think about. Something that it's broad but precise. If that makes any sense. So, let's see if I can find a... So, if I can find the spot. This book has helped out primarily a lot of men, which is sad. But it has helped women as well. But it has helped out. For some reason, it has struck a chord with men, and I can understand why, because it certainly has struck a chord with me. My parents are great parents. My father is a phenomenal father. I would never trade him for anything. But parents, they can't cover everything, and sometimes things get missed. And I grew up in a very broken family. My parents got a divorce when I was just getting into high school, just literally in a sophomore year of high school. So I was a young adolescent man. And those are very important years, because I think when you're an adolescent, those are the years where character development is quite frankly a big deal. and not so much of, it's one of those things where you learn what your responsibilities of being a man is. What does it mean to be a man? Does it mean that you like to watch football and drink beer? No. I mean, sure, those are manly traits, but that is not what it means to be a man. What it means to be a man is to do what? Well, you need to be a provider first and foremost. You need to understand that the necessity of being a provider lands on your shoulders, not the wife. Certainly the wife can have her career. That is fine. But you are to be the provider. She is not to carry that burden. I'm not saying that a woman cannot have a career. What I am saying is the burden of providing is not on the woman. The burden of parenting, the burden of birth is on the woman. The woman, her burden in life, her main role is birth. It's the one thing a man cannot do. He cannot birth children. A woman can. It is important that a woman takes care of herself so that she can make babies. That is her burden in life, to be a mother, to birth children, to rear children. She can have a career. She can be the strong, independent woman. There's no doubt about that. There's nothing wrong with that. But the point is that there are some set rules in life. And for the man, it is to be a provider. For the man, it is to love his wife. And in terms of the Christian world, a man is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. That's a lot of love. These are things that we have to learn. How do you do these things? How do you be a provider, a protector, and love your wife so much like Jesus loved the church? Well, the way you have to do that is, one, you have to stand up straight. That's the first rule. You have to be confident. You have to know how to negotiate this world. You need to know how to communicate, how to socialize, and not just socialize like going out and drinking beers, but you need to know how to actually physically have a social life at work and outside of work in such a way where people want to be around you. People want to seek you out. That's important, because the more people want to be around you, that usually means it's because you're successful or you're projecting success, and thus that helps build up your self-esteem. This book helps with all of that. And I think it targets men mainly because a lot of men today are not getting taught the things that they need to be taught in their adolescent years. My father did a lot. My father, I'm telling you, there's three things that you can, no one can take away from you, but you can give away. It's like character, integrity, and all this stuff. And God just beat it into me. My father did a lot to help me in that regard. He was there. But my dad, when my parents divorced, my dad had his social life, and he was with his new wife, fiance, for a while there. So there was some time where I was figuring some things out on my own, and it's not a big deal. And my mother was there too, but I think there was a few, it's kind of like, it's like this. My mom and my father I'm a puzzle, and they're putting me together so that I can go be an adult. And I just think there was a few pieces that didn't get put in. And I think that this book really kind of helped put those little pieces that were missed in. And I think for some men who don't have good parents or had no parents, which so many kids today, especially men, they don't have a father figure in their life like I did, who gave me a much more complete puzzle in terms of as an adult. I was much more put together than many people. It's funny. I didn't think I really needed a book like this. It wasn't until I read it where I realized, wow, there was a lot of stuff I just didn't realize that I was doing that could have been better. I learned a lot about myself by reading this book. So in many ways, it wasn't that my pieces were missing. It's just that you don't realize sometimes that there's that piece missing until you read a book like this. And so, but there's these guys, there's kids, these adolescent boys and these 20-something-year-old guys, young men, they're going through life and they don't know why, but for some reason they're just struggling. And oftentimes what happens is they're looking for someone to blame. They want to blame the system. They want to blame capitalism. They want to blame Democrats or Republicans. They want to blame their boss. Maybe they want to blame their parents that were never around. But nonetheless, what ends up happening is they can pick up a book like this and they can say, listen, stop blaming everything around you. This is what you need to do to be better. And it changes them. It fills in more of those gaps, and sometimes some of the gaps they didn't realize they had, and it allows them to stop being a boy, and it allows them to be a man. And the same thing can happen for a woman, certainly, but this book has certainly benefited men a little bit more than women, but that's not to say it will not benefit women as well. So needless to say, after reading this book, I realized, wow, there's a lot that I could improve upon. And I felt like I learned a lot. And there's some things in this book that were a little more, that stood out to me a little bit more than others. And I'm sure it'll be the same way for you. You could read this book and maybe some things were different for you. I'm going to go over a couple of the things that I thought stood out to me. But first I want to go over just a quick brief of what the 12 rules are. Sorry about that. So the rules are pretty much straightforward. There's 12 of them. Rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Rule number 2, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Rule number 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. Rule number 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Rule number 5, don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. That chapter, I don't have children, but I found that chapter to be interesting, so I am going to pick a little bit from it. Rule 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Rule 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Rule number 8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Love that one. And it's not what you think. Rule number 9, assume that the person you are listening to might know something that you don't. Rule 10, be precise in your speech. Another good one. Actually, Rule 10 was a really good one for me. I really like that one. And maybe not for the reasons you might think. Rule number 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. That one's a little bit misleading by the title. Rule 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And so some of these titles are kind of obvious, right? And then some of them are like, what is he getting at? But that's the beauty of this book is Rule 12, pet a cat you encounter on the street. Well, what the hell could he possibly be talking about? Well, he gets into something very deep and it goes into a path. And even rule number 11, which is do not bother children when they are skateboarding. When I started that chapter, I'm like, should I skip this chapter? This doesn't seem to make sense. But really, I ended up learning some stuff from it. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting and very profound. Rule number 5, I thought was good because I think there's a lot of parents out there today that need to read this rule. I don't care how good of a parent you think you are. Believe me, we're all watching you and we are judging you. Even though I don't have kids, believe me, I still have things I want to say. You better believe it. I go out in public. I see how these kids are acting. It is awful, especially, and he touches on this, which is so true. You ever go out to a restaurant? You're trying to have a nice meal with your friends or maybe just your wife or your husband or whoever. And you're sitting there and you're just having a conversation. And the next thing you know, this kid just starts screaming at the highest pitch possible. And you look over and you're like, oh, God, okay. And you think to yourself, it'll stop. But then it doesn't. It just keeps going and going all night. And you just think to yourself, like, why are you not doing anything about this kid? That is what I'm talking about. You need to read this rule. So, rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. He starts with, actually, it's not okay. He says here, recently I watched a 3-year-old boy trail his mother and father slowly through a crowded airport. He was screaming violently at 5-second intervals. And, more important, he was doing it voluntarily. He wasn't at the end of his tether. As a parent, I could tell from the tone, he was irritating his parents and hundreds of others of people to gain attention. Maybe he needed something, but that was no way to get it. And his parents should have let him know that. You might object that perhaps they were worn out and jet lagged after a long trip, but 30 seconds of a carefully directed problem solving would have brought the shameful episode to a halt. More thoughtful parents would have not let someone they truly cared for become the object of a crowd's contempt. I've also watched a couple unable or unwilling to say no to their 2-year-old, obliged to follow closely behind him everywhere he went. every moment of what was supposed to be an enjoyable social visit because he misbehaved so badly when not micromanaged that he could not be given a second of genuine freedom without risk. The desire of his parents to let their children act without correction on every impulse perversely produced precisely the opposite effect. They deprived him instead of every opportunity to engage in independent action. Because they did not dare to teach him what no means, he had no conception of the reasonable limits enabling maximal toddler autonomy. It was a classic example of too much chaos breeding too much order, and the inevitable reversal. I have similarly seen parents rendered unable to engage in adult conversation at a dinner party because their children, 4 and 5, dominated the social scene, eating the centers out of all the sliced bread, subjecting everyone to their juvenile tyranny, while mom and dad watched, embarrassed and bereft of the ability to intervene. When my now adult daughter was a child, another child once hit her on the head with a metal toy truck. I watched the same child, 1 year later, viciously push his younger sister backward over a fragile glass surface coffee table. His mother picked him up immediately afterward, but not her frightened daughter, and told him in hushed tones not to do such things, while she patted him comfortably in the manner clearly indicative of approval. She was out to produce a little god emperor of the universe. That's the unstated goal of many a mother, including many who consider themselves advocates for full gender equality. Such women will object vociferously to any command uttered by an adult male, but will trot off in seconds to make their progeny a peanut butter sandwich if he demands it while immersed self-importantly in a video game. The future mates of such boys have every reason to hate their mothers-in-laws. Respect for women? That's for the other boys, other men, not for their dear sons. You can see where this is going, right? Something of the same sort may underlie in part the preference for male children, seen most particularly in places such as India, Pakistan, and China. Actually, I don't really want to get in on that. He goes into a pretty big, kind of a deep dive into, actually, I might actually do that. Yes, I am going to continue on that part. Sorry, guys. Something of the same sort may underlie, in part, the preference for male children seen most particularly in places such as India, Pakistan, and China, where sex-selective abortion is widely practiced. The Wikipedia entry for that practice attributes its existence to cultural norms, favoring male over female children. He puts in parentheses here, I cite Wikipedia because it is collectively written and edited, and therefore the perfect place to find accepted wisdom. Of course, that's tongue-in-cheek. But there's no evidence that such ideas are strictly cultural. There are plausible psychobiological reasons for the evolution of such an attitude, and they're not pretty. From a modern egalitarian perspective, if circumstances force you to put all your eggs into one basket, so to speak, a son is a better bet. By the strict standards of evolutionary logic, where the proliferation of your genes is all that matters, well, why? Well, a reproductively successful daughter might gain you 8 or 9 children. The Holocaust survivor Yida Schwartz, a star in this regard, had 3 generations of direct descendants who matched such performance. She was the ancestor of almost 2,000 people by the time of her death in 2010. But the sky is truly the limit with a reproductively successful son. Sex with multiple female partners is his ticket to exponential reproduction. He puts in parentheses, given our species' practical limitation to single births. Rumor has it that the actor Warren Beatty and the athlete Wilt Chamberlain each bedded multiple thousands of women, something not unknown as well among rock stars. They didn't produce children in those numbers. Modern birth control limits that. But similar celebrities in the past have done so. The forefather of the King dynasty, Gioconga, circa 1550, for example, is the male line ancestor of 1.5 million people in northeastern China. The medieval Yule dynasty produced up to 3 million male descendants, localized mainly in northwestern Ireland and the U.S. through the Irish immigration. And the king of them all, Genghis Khan, the conqueror of much of Asia, is forefather of 8% of the men in Central Asia, 16 million male descendants, 34 generations later. So from a deep biological perspective, there are reasons why parents might favor sons sufficiently to eliminate female fetuses, although I'm not claiming direct casualty, nor suggesting the lack of other, more culturally dependent reasons. Preferential treatment awarded a son during development might even help produce an attractive, well-rounded, competent man. This happened in the case of the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. By his own account, a man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror, that confidence of success that often induces real success. Fair enough. The feeling of a conqueror can all too easily become actual conqueror. Genghis Khan's outstanding reproductive success certainly came at the cost of any success whatsoever for others, including the dead millions of Chinese, Persians, Russians, and Hungarians. Spoiling a son might therefore work well from the standpoint of the selfish gene, allowing the favored child's genes to replicate themselves in innumerable offspring. To use the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins' famous expression, but it can make for the dark, painful spectacle in here and now and mutate into something indescribably dangerous. None of this means that all mothers favor all sons over their daughters, or that daughters are not sometimes favored over sons, or that fathers don't sometimes favor their sons. Other factors can clearly dominate. Sometimes, for example, unconscious hatred. Sometimes not so unconscious either. Overrides any concern a parent might have for any child, regardless of gender or personality or situation. I saw a 4-year-old boy allowed to go hungry on a regular basis. His nanny had been injured, and he was being cycled through the neighbors for temporary care. When his mother dropped him off at our house, and this story here, by the way, folks, this story is quite interesting, and I think it's important that you listen to this story. His nanny had been injured, and he had been cycled through the neighbors for temporary care. When his mother dropped him off at our house, she indicated that he wouldn't eat at all day. That's okay, she said. It wasn't okay, in case that's not obvious. This was the same 4-year-old boy who clung to my wife for hours in absolute desperation and total commitment when she tenaciously, persistently, and mercifully managed to feed him an entire lunchtime meal, rewarding him throughout for his cooperation and refusing to let him fail. He started out with a closed mouth, sitting with all of us at the dining room table, my wife and I, our 2 kids, and the 2 neighborhood kids we looked after during the day. She put the spoon in front of him, waiting patiently, persistently, while he moved his head back and forth, refusing its entry. Using defensive methods typical of a reluctant and non-too-well-attended 2-year-old, she didn't let him fail. She patted him on the head every time he managed a mouthful, telling him sincerely that he was a good boy when he did so. She did think he was a good boy. He was a cute, damaged kid. 10 not too painful minutes later, he finished his meal. We were all watching intently. It was a drama of life and death. Look, she said, holding up his bowl, you finished all of that. This boy, who was standing in the corner voluntarily and unhappily when I first saw him, who wouldn't interact with other kids, who frowned chronically, who wouldn't respond to me when I tickled and prodded him, trying to get him to play, this boy broke immediately into a wide, radiant smile. It brought joy to everyone at the table. 20 years later, writing it down today, it still brings me to tears. Afterward, he followed my wife around like a puppy for the rest of the day, refusing to let her out of his sight. When she sat down, he jumped in her lap, cuddling in, opening himself back up to the world, searching desperately for the love he had been continually denied. Later in the day, but far too soon, his mother reappeared. She came down the stairs into the room we all occupied. "Oh, Supermom," she uttered resentfully, seeing her son curled up in my wife's lap. Then she departed, black, murderous heart unchanged, doomed child in hand. She was a psychologist. The things you can see with even a single open eye. It's no wonder that people want to stay blind. It's fascinating to me, and the thing that I got out of that article, or that one simple story out of that book, which was take the time to do the right thing. It took a few extra minutes and a little bit of patience And not only was his wife patient with his child, she got him to eat, and she rewarded him by praising him every time he did it. And so oftentimes parents are like, ugh. And I'm going to go off on a tangent here because it irritates the hell out of me. There's a commercial on TV that I just cannot stand. It's the commercial from, it's the Blue Box macaroni and cheese. You all know who that is. And in the commercial, it shows the little girl refusing to eat her vegetables. And the mother's chasing her around the house like, you have to take 2 more bites. And eventually the mom gives in and just makes macaroni and cheese, and then everybody's happy. And the music plays, oh, everyone's happy. But really what you've just raised is a little demon child. What you've done is you've allowed this child to dictate the terms, and that child will become a spoiled brat. Instead of taking the time, first of all, you should never let your child leave the dinner table. Those parents are bad parents. Okay, they've screwed this child up. The child's failed. If the child's getting up and running around the house, refusing to eat, you failed in many, many areas. We got to break this down back down to Barney style and get you from ground zero, because the child should know better than to do that. And then you're going to have to just sit there with that child and say, listen, you ain't leaving this dinner table until you eat your broccoli, because I'm not going to feed you processed macaroni and cheese as if that's a better option. Congratulations. Not only have you failed as a parent, but you failed the child in giving her something nutritious to eat. So now she's going to be a pain in the ass because she's putting poison in her body, which is going to cause her to act out erratically, which is why some of these kids get misdiagnosed with ADHD and Asperger's and whatever. It's not because they actually have it. It's because they're eating some toxic diet, which causes them to fly off the handle. Everything they eat is loaded with sugar and carbs. What do you think is going to happen to that kid? I don't understand why he doesn't want to sit at the desk all day. Well, that's probably because he's got all this crap in his system. And now you just gave him Blue Box macaroni and cheese, which, by the way, a few years ago, they found out was giving people cancer. Congratulations. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to skip ahead. Can you tell this gets me passionate. I'm sorry. I don't have kids, but you know, I think about it. I think about it a lot. Like, how would I raise my kids? What would I do in this situation? What would I have done better? And I try to see it from the perspective of the parent too. But there's so many situations today where we see parents who are not willing to take the time to sit down and actually do what they need to do to raise their kid right. They just want to put up the iPad in front of their face. They want to make them the macaroni and cheese. They want to let them eat what they want to eat. They want them to do what they want to do. Just watch TV, watch Blue's Clues, watch whatever's on the television. It doesn't matter. I don't want to deal with you because I'm tired and I've worked all day. The problem is that you have 2 parents who work all day and nobody at the home to raise the child. So what's happening? The TV's raising the children. You got these hyperactive cartoons on TV. They're teaching the kids to act hyperactive. All their food is loaded up with garbage. That causes them to act erratically. You take the kid to the doctor because you can't quite figure out why they're acting the way they're acting. And the doctor says, oh, you must be ADHD. Here's a bottle of pills. You feed the pills into the kid. The kid turns into some sort of doped up, messed up kid. Now his brain's not developing properly because he's got all these chemicals in his brain from the pills the doctor gave him. And then he ends up, become some nihilistic, depressed, a half adult, half life in his 20s. And his wife can't figure out why he can't get his shit together. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. I'm not saying that both parents can't work, but I'm just saying the parents need to put, if you're going to have kids, that's fine. But if you're going to have kids, you need to accept the responsibility of having kids, and you need to make it work. If that means you don't get the big screen TV and the fancy new car because someone needs to spend a little bit more time at home to raise the children, then that's what needs to happen. And there's a lot less of that because everyone's so damn selfish. And it's raising a generation of selfish children. Oh, don't get me wrong. They'll project on you that they want to help the world, but they don't really want to help the world for anybody else but themselves because they think the world's going to come to an end. They're worried more about their own life. They're not worried about your life. Trust me. Talk to them for more than 10 minutes. You'll realize how narcissistic these kids really are. But I digress. Parent or friend, he says, this new section. The neglect and mistreatment that is part and parcel for poorly structured or even entirely absent disciplinary approaches can be deliberate, motivated by explicit, conscious, if misguided, parental motives. But more often than not, modern parents are simply paralyzed by the fear that they will no longer be liked or even loved by their children if they chastise them for any reason. They want their children's friendship above all and are willing to sacrifice respect to get it. This is not good. A child will have many friends, but only 2 parents. If that. And parents are more, not less, than friends. Friends have very limited authority to correct. Every parent, therefore, needs to learn to tolerate the monetary anger or even hatred directed towards them by their children. After necessary corrective action has been taken, as the capacity of children to perceive or care about long-term consequences is very limited, parents are the arbiters of society. They teach children how to behave so that other people will be able to interact meaningfully and productively with them. It is an act of responsibility to discipline your child. It is not anger at misbehavior. It is not revenge for a misdeed. It is instead a careful combination of mercy and long-term judgment. Proper discipline requires effort, indeed. It is virtually synonymous with effort. It is difficult to pay careful attention to children. It is difficult to figure out what is wrong and what is right and why. It is difficult to formulate just and compassionate strategies of discipline and to negotiate their application with others deeply involved in a child's care. Because of this combination of responsibility and difficulty, any suggestion that all constraints placed on children are damaging can be perversely welcome. Such a notion, once accepted, allows adults who should know better to abandon their duty to serve as agents of enculturation and pretend that doing so is good for children. It's a deep and pernicious act of self-deception. It's lazy, cruel, and inexcusable. And our proclivity to rationalize does not end there. We assume that rules will irremediately inhibit what would otherwise be the boundless and intrinsic creativity of our children, even though the scientific literature clearly indicates, first, that creativity beyond the trivial is shockingly rare, and second, that strict limitations facilitates rather than inhibit creative achievement. Belief in the purely destructive element of rules and structure is frequently conjoined with the idea that children will make good choices about when to sleep and when to eat, if their perfect natures are merely allowed to manifest themselves. These are equally ungrounded assumptions. Children are perfectly capable of attempting to subsist on hot dogs, chicken fingers, and Fruit Loops if doing so will attract attention, provide power, or shield them from trying anything new. Instead of going to bed wisely and peacefully, children will fight nighttime unconsciousness until they are staggered by fatigue. They're also perfectly willing to provoke adults while exploring the complex contours of the social environment, just like juvenile chimps harassing adults in their tropes. Observing the consequences of teasing and taunting enables chimp and child alike to discover the limits of what might otherwise be too unstructured and terrifying freedom. Such limits, when discovered, provide security, even if their detection causes momentary disappointment or frustration. I remember taking my daughter to the playground once when she was about 2. She was playing on the monkey bars, hanging in midair. A particularly provocative little monster of about the same age was standing above her on the same bar she was gripping. I watched him move towards her, our eyes locked. He slowly and deliberately stepped on her hands with increasing force over and over as he stared me down. He knew exactly what he was doing. Up yours, Daddy-O. That was his philosophy. He had already concluded that adults were contemptible and that he could safely defy them. Too bad then that he was destined to become one. That was the hopeless future his parents had saddled him with. To his great and salutary shock, I picked him bodily off the playground structure and threw him 30 feet down the field. No, I didn't. I just took my daughter somewhere else, but it would have been better for him if I had. Imagine a toddler repeatedly striking his mother in the face. Why would he do such a thing? It's a stupid question. It's unacceptably naive. The answer is obvious: to dominate his mother, to see if he can get away with it. Violence, after all, is no mystery. It's peace that's a mystery. Violence is the default. It's easy. It's peace that is difficult, learned, inculcated, earned. People often get basic psychological questions backwards. Why do people take drugs? Not a mystery. It's why they don't take them all the time that's the mystery. Why do people suffer from anxiety? That's not a mystery. How is it that people can even be calm? There's the mystery. We're breakable and mortal. A million things can go wrong in a million ways. We should be terrified out of our skulls at every second, but we're not. The same can be said for depression, laziness, and criminality. If I can hurt and overpower you, then I can do exactly what I want, when I want, even when you're around. I can torment you to appease my curiosity. I can take the attention away from you and dominate you. I can steal your toy. Children hit first because aggression is innate, although more dominant in some individuals and less in others. And second, because aggression facilitates desire. It's foolish to assume that such behavior must be learned. A snake does not have to be taught to strike. It's in the nature of the beast. 2-year-olds, statistically speaking, are the most violent of people. They kick, hit, and bite, and they steal the property of others. They do so to explore, to express outrage and frustration, and to gratify their impulsive desires. More importantly, for our purposes, they do so to discover the true limits of permissible behavior. How else are they ever going to puzzle out what is acceptable? Infants are like blind people, searching for a wall. They have to push forward and test to see where their actual boundaries lie, and those are too seldom where they are said to be. Consistent correction of such action indicates the limits of acceptable aggression to the child. Its absent merely heightens curiosity, so the child will hit and bite and kick. If he is aggressive and dominant until something indicates a limit, I read that wrong. So the child will hit and bite and kick if he is aggressive and dominant until something indicates a limit. How hard can I hit mommy? Until she objects. Given that, correction is better sooner than later, if the desired end result of the parent is not to be hit. Correction also helps the child learn that hitting others is a suboptimal social strategy. Without that correction, no child is going to undergo the effortful process of organizing and regulating their impulses. So those impulses can coexist without conflict within the psyche of the child and in the broader social world. It is no simple matter to organize a mind. It goes on and on and on. And it's important to understand. And I'll finish this up here. He gets down into deep here with the why it's important. And I'll tell you this. See if I can jump ahead here. He goes on here to say that my son was particularly ornery when he was a toddler. When my daughter was little, I could paralyze her into immobility with an evil glance. Such an intervention had no effect at all on my son. He had my wife, who was no pushover, stymied at the dinner table at the time. He was 9 months of age. He fought her for control over the spoon. Good, we thought. We didn't want to feed him one more minute than necessary anyway. But the little blighter would only eat 3 or 4 mouthfuls, then he would play. He would stir his food around in the bowl. He would drop bits of it all over the high chair tabletop and watch as it fell onto the floor below. No problem. He was exploring. But then he wasn't eating enough. Then, because he wasn't eating enough, he wasn't sleeping enough. Then his midnight crying was waking his parents. Then they were getting grumpy and out of sorts. He was frustrating his mother, and she was taking it out on me. The trajectory wasn't good. After a few days of this degeneration, I decided to take the spoon back. I prepared for war. I set aside sufficient time. A patient adult can defeat a 2-year-old, hard as it is to believe. As the saying goes, old age and treachery can always overcome youth and skill. This is partly because time lasts forever when you're 2. Half an hour for me was a week for my son. I assured myself of victory. He was stubborn and horrible, but I could be worse. We sat down, face to face, bowl in front of him. It was high noon, and he knew it, and I knew it. He picked up the spoon. I took it from him and spooned up a delicious mouthful of mush and moved it deliberately towards his mouth. He eyed me in precisely the same manner as the playground foot monster. He curled his lips downward into a tight frown, rejecting all entry. I chased his mouth around with the spoon as he twisted his head around in tight circles. But I had more tricks up my sleeves. I poked him in the chest with my free hand in a manner calculated to annoy. He didn't budge. I did it again and again and again. Not hard, but not in a manner to be ignored either. 10 or so pokes later, he opened his mouth, planning to emit a sound of outrage. Ha! His mistake. I deftly inserted the spoon. He tried gamingly to force out the offending food with his tongue. But I know how to deal with that too. I just placed my forefinger horizontally over his lips, or across his lips. Some came out, but some was swallowed. Score 1 for Dad. I gave him a pat on the head and told him that he was a good boy, and I meant it. When someone does something you are trying to get them to do, reward them. No grudge after victory. An hour later, it was all over. There was outrage. There was some wailing. My wife had to leave the room. The stress was too much. But food was eaten by child. My son collapsed, exhausted on my chest. He had a nap. We had a nap together. And he liked me a lot better when he woke up than he had before he was disciplined. This was something I commonly observed when I went head to head, not only with him. A little later, we entered into a babysitting swap with another couple. All the kids would get together at one house. Then the one pair of parents would go out to dinner or a movie and leave the other pair to watch the children, who were all under 3. One evening, another set of parents joined us. I was unfamiliar with their son, a large, strong boy of 2. He won't sleep, said the father. After you put him to bed, he will crawl out of his bed and come downstairs. We usually put on an Elmo video and let him watch it. There's no damn way I'm rewarding his recalcitrant child for unacceptable behavior. He uses some big words that I can't pronounce, folks. I apologize. He says, there's no damn way I'm rewarding this child for unacceptable behavior, I thought. And I'm certainly not showing anyone any Elmo video. Always hated that creepy, whiny puppet. He was a disgrace to Jim Henson's legacy. So reward by Elmo was not on the table. I didn't say anything, of course. There's just no talking to parents about their children until they are ready to listen. 2 hours later, we put the kids to bed. 4 of the 5 went promptly to sleep, but not the Muppet aficionado. I had placed him in a crib, however, so he couldn't escape. But he could still howl, and that's exactly what he did. That was tricky. It was a good strategy on his part. It was annoying, and it threatened to wake up all the other kids, who would then also start to howl. Score 1 for the kid. So I journeyed to the bedroom. Lie down, I said. That produced no effect. Lie down, I said, or I will lay you down. Reasoning with kids isn't often too much use, particularly under such circumstances, but I believe in fair warning. Of course, he didn't lay down. He howled again for effect. Kids do this frequently. Scared parents think that a crying child is also sad or hurt. This is simply not true. Anger is one of the most common reasons for crying. Careful analysis of the musculature patterns of crying children has confirmed this. Anger crying and fear or sadness crying do not look the same. They also don't sound the same and can be distinguished with careful attention. Anger crying is often an act of dominance and should be dealt with as such. I lifted him up and laid him down, gently, patiently, but firmly. He got up. I laid him down. He got up. I laid him down. He got up. This time, I laid him down and I kept my hand on his back. He struggled mightily, but ineffectually. He was, after all, only 1/10 my size. I could take him with one hand. And so I kept him down and spoke calmly to him and told him he was a good boy and that he should relax. I gave him a soother and pounded it gently on his back. He started to relax. His eyes began to close. I removed my hand. He promptly got to his feet. I was impressed. This kid had spirit. I lifted him up, laid him back down again. Lie down, monster, I said. I pounded his back gently some more. Some kids find that soothing. He was getting tired. He was ready to capitulate. He closed his eyes. I got to my feet and headed quietly and quickly to the door. I glanced back to check his position one last time. He was back on his feet. I pointed my finger at him. Down, monster, I said, and I meant it. He went down like a shot. I closed the door. We liked each other. Neither my wife nor I heard a peep out of him for the rest of the night. How was the kid? His father asked when he got home. Much later that night. Good, I said. No problem at all. He's asleep right now. Did he get up? Said his father. No, I said. He slept the whole time. Dad looked at me. He wanted to know, but he didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Don't cast pearls before swine, as the old saying goes. And you might think that's harsh, but training your child not to sleep and rewarding him with the antics of a creepy puppet, that's harsh too. You pick your poison, and I'll pick mine. So you see there the idea of patience and just persistence. The child will always be persistent, but you're an adult. And like he said, you've got more time than that kid does. A few minutes can feel like hours to a kid. So if you're just a little bit more diligent and you work with that child will eventually comply and he'll be better off for it. And so will you. He goes on to, he'll have here discipline and punish. This is a decently long chapter. And it's one of those things. I'll see if he talks about things like a well-behaved child or a child that's properly disciplined ends up becoming a better adult. And primarily because in the first couple of years, the first 2 years of the child, it's very important that a child learns how to behave and how to socialize properly with other children. This is very important because if you fail to do this in those first 2 years, statistically, children will be more likely to not know how to properly socialize in their more adolescent years and their adult years. It'll make them less desirable to other people. And when that happens, that triggers a whole mess of other issues. So if your child is not able to properly socialize, that's not to say that they won't be introverted or extroverted and they won't seek out attention versus, if you're introverted, you find yourself becoming tired around people. There's a difference between being introverted and then people not wanting to be around you because you don't know how to act. Okay? It is vitally important in the first 2 years. And I think that this chapter alone really hits on that. If you're a parent or you're thinking about becoming a parent, it's really, I think this chapter is the first chapter you should start at because it will really help you, especially if your child hasn't been born yet, and what to expect and how you should navigate those first 2 years because it's very, very important. They say if this child is not taught properly how to socialize, how to act in those first 2 years, they are very likely to become failures in many things in their life. They're less likely to become successful. They're less likely to be social. The idea that people will pick up and perceive that this person is not someone they want to be around, that will lead to that person becoming a failure. It leads to a whole mess of problems, not to including ending up like a Columbine kid. I'll finish off here with the last, because we're already an hour and 12 minutes into the show, but it says here, a child who pays attention instead of drifting and can play and does not whine and is comical but not annoying and is trustworthy, that child will have friends wherever he goes. His teachers will like him, and so will his parents. If he attends politely to adults, he will be attended to, smiled at, and happily instructed. He will thrive in what can easily be a cold, unforgiving, and hostile world. Clear rules make for secure children and calm, rational parents. Clear principles of discipline and punishment balance mercy and justice so that the social development of the psychological maturity can be optimally promoted. Clear rules and proper discipline help the child. And the family and society establish, maintain, and expand the order that is all that protects us from chaos and terrors of the underworld, where everything is uncertain, anxiety-provoking, hopeless, and depressing. There's no greater gifts that a committed and courageous parent can bestow. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. This chapter is really great. I would love to just spend a whole episode reading this entire chapter alone. In fact, I wouldn't mind spending a whole episode reading all these chapters just because they're so good, but I'm afraid I'd probably get in trouble for doing that. Another rule that I felt was very profound, and not in the way that you would expect, because a lot of people will think, well, that's obvious. Don't do this, don't do that. But rule number 8, which is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Well, that seems obvious, especially for someone who, let's say you're a Christian like I am. Thou shalt not lie. It's a commandment. It seems like an obvious one to follow, but the thing about it is, and the reason why I found it profound, is that he's not talking about the big lie. He's not talking about the obvious lie. We all know what the obvious lie is. If you're a child, you reach into the cookie jar and eat a cookie when you know you're not supposed to. If your mother asks you, did you take a cookie out of the cookie jar? And you say, no, I didn't. Well, that's an obvious lie and you shouldn't have lied, even though your mother knows you did it. That is the obvious lie. When your boss asks you a question and you know that you messed up and you lie, or maybe you were supposed to be somewhere and you forgot, or you just didn't want to go, and so you lie. Maybe you tell your family that you're not feeling well and you decide that you don't want to go to their house for the holidays, but really you're lying and you end up going to a party with your friends. So instead of just telling your family that I'm going to go to this party with my friends instead of spending the holidays with you, I lie to you and tell you I don't feel good. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you get caught in it. That's a true story. I'm not going to say who did that. If they hear this podcast, they'll know who they are. But those are the obvious lies. We know not to do that. At least you should know not to do that. This chapter is talking about the not so obvious lie. The lie that you don't think is a big deal. And maybe they are the obvious lies to others. But I'm talking more like the white lie. The things that you say to avoid confrontation. When in certain circumstances, confrontation is necessary to correct a problem. This is a problem we see in relationships, especially marriage. How often does a husband lie to his wife so he doesn't start a fight, or vice versa? They tell him a lie to get him off their back. Or they just, kind of tweak the truth a little. When in reality, the truth should just come out. After all, it's like the Bible said, the truth will set you free. This is true, it will. And I think it's important to understand that many people know when you're not being truthful. As much as people like to believe that they can lie, there are some people that are very, very aware of whether or not you are telling the truth. And so oftentimes these people who are hyper aware can read right through and read between the lines, and that gains a mistrust. This is a great example of what I'm talking about in this chapter. And I'm going to read this chapter, and please pay attention, because this one I really like. It's really, if this was the only thing you read in this chapter, it tells you everything you need to know. Let me get a sip of water. All right. I'm skipping ahead here. It's titled My Landlord. He says, I had a landlord around that time. He's speaking about his time in the previous chapter, or not chapter, but previous paragraph. I had a landlord around the time who had been president of a local biker gang. My wife, Tammy, and I lived next door to him in his parents' small apartment building. His girlfriend bore the marks of self-inflicted injuries, characteristic of borderline personality disorder. She killed herself while we lived there. Dennis, large, strong French-Canadian with a gray beard, was a gifted amateur electrician. He had some artistic talent too, and was supporting himself making laminated wood posters with custom neon lights. He was trying to stay sober after being released from jail. Still, every month or so, he would disappear on a days-long bender. He was one of those men who have a miraculous capacity for alcohol. He could drink 50 or 60 beers in a 2-day binge and remain standing the whole time. This may seem hard to believe, but it's true. I was doing research on familial alcoholism at the time, and it was not rare for my subjects to report their father's habitual consumption of 40 ounces of vodka a day. These patriarchs would buy 1 bottle every afternoon, Monday through Friday, and then 2 on Saturday to tide them over through the Sunday liquor store closure. Dennis had a little dog. Sometimes Tammy and I would hear Dennis and the dog out in the backyard at 4 a.m. during one of Dennis's marathon drinking sessions, both of them howling madly at the moon. Now and then, on occasion like that, Dennis would drink up every cent he had saved. Then he would show up at our apartment. We would hear a knock at night. Dennis would be at the door, swaying precipitously, upright and miraculously conscious. He would be standing there, toaster, microwaver, poster in hand. He wanted to sell these to me so he could keep on drinking. I bought a few things like this, pretending that it was being charitable. Eventually, Tammy convinced me that I couldn't do it anymore. It made her nervous, and it was bad for Dennis, whom she liked. Reasonable and even necessary as her request was, it still placed me in a tricky position. What do you say to a severely intoxicated, violence-prone ex-biker gang president with patchy English when he tries to sell his microwave to you at your open door at 2 a.m? This was a question even more difficult than those presented by the institutionalized patient or paranoid flayer. But the answer was the same, the truth. But you'd bloody well better know what the truth is. Dennis knocked again soon after my wife and I had talked. He looked at me in the direct, skeptical, narrow-eyed manner characteristic of the tough, heavy-drinking man who was no stranger to trouble. That look means, prove your innocence. Weaving slightly back and forth, he asked, politely, if I might be interested in purchasing his toaster. I rid myself, to the bottom of my soul, of primate dominance, motivations, and moral superiority. I told him as directly and carefully as I could that I would not. I was playing no tricks. In that moment, I wasn't an educated, Anglophone, fortunate, upwardly mobile young man. He wasn't an ex-con Quebecois biker with a blood alcohol level of 0.24. No, we were two men of goodwill trying to help each other out in our common struggle to do the right thing. I said that he had told me he was trying to quit drinking. I said that it would not be good for him if I provided him with more money. I said that he made Tammy, whom he respected, nervous when he came over so drunk and so late and tried to sell me things. He glared seriously at me without speaking for about 15 seconds. That was plenty long enough. He was watching. I knew for any micro-expression revealing sarcasm, deceit, contempt, or self-congratulation, but I had thought it through carefully, and I'd only said things I truly meant. I had chosen my words carefully, traversing a treacherous swamp, feeling out a partially submerged stone path. Dennis turned and left. Not only that, he remembered our conversation. Despite his state of professional level intoxication, he didn't try to sell me anything again. Our relationship, which was quite good, given the great cultural gaps between us, became even more solid. Taking the easy way out or telling the truth, those are not merely two different choices. They're different pathways through life. They're utterly different ways of existing. I love that story because that is what he's trying to get at. It's the tough truths that we need to tell that we often don't. Speak the truth, or at least don't lie. It's not about just lying for lying's sake or telling the truth for truth's sake. It's about stepping up in the moment when you know that sometimes when you speak the truth, it could very well mean that you could be hurt in a situation, or you may even hurt somebody else's feelings. But at the end of the day, the truth is what's going to help that person. It's going to bring respect to you. It's going to solidify a relationship, much like it did with his neighbor, his landlord. Think about all the times that you were in an argument with your significant other. Maybe you got in an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend, your husband or wife. Or think about the times where you were upset about something, or you don't like something that somebody else does, and instead of just telling the truth and being out with it, and dealing with the repercussions, you leave it be. And well, what happens? The problem doesn't go away. The lie doesn't help the other person, certainly doesn't help you, and that relationship begins to crumble. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. It's such a great chapter. It leads me into rule number 10, which I think is extremely important, and I found was relatable to the last one. Be precise in your speech was a big deal to me, and not for maybe the reasons you guys think. I have a podcast. Be precise in your speech makes sense. I should probably know exactly what I want to say when I want to say it in a clear, articulate way to my listeners. Well, that's true, and that's the obvious. That's obvious. But that's not the thing he's getting at here. Although you could say he is, but the thing that I took away from this is be precise in exactly what you want to say. How often have you been in a conversation this kind of goes back to my previous point. Maybe you don't lie to your spouse, but maybe you don't tell them everything. Or maybe you are trying to communicate to somebody, such as your spouse, but you're not doing it in a very clear way. Maybe it's because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or maybe it's just you don't really know how to say it. This is why in this chapter he talks about this, that if you feel offended by something, first of all, you should take a moment and sit back and go, he uses relationships a lot in this chapter, and that's kind of why I am. But let's say your spouse offends you. Maybe they do something you don't like, or maybe you're upset. They did something and now you're upset. First of all, you got to ask yourself the two questions. One, am I upset because of myself? Is it something that I can change or I can do better? Or is it really somebody else's fault that I am upset? And if it is somebody else's fault, why is it somebody else's fault? What are they doing? Okay, we know what the problem is. We know what they've done. We've confirmed that it's not my fault. We've confirmed that it's this person's fault. Let's say it's your wife's fault or your husband's fault. They're the ones who have caused you to be upset. Well, what did they do? Maybe they didn't put the dishes away. Okay, fine. How do you fix that problem? What is the solution to that problem? And then go to the person and articulate that in clear fashion. Hello. Good morning. Good evening. Hi, baby. How you doing? Listen, I'm a little upset. I was hoping you would do the dishes. They were not done. I think moving forward, if we work together to do the dishes after dinner, I think it would help them get done, and then neither of us are upset. Maybe we could come up with a plan where either I do the dishes one day and you do it the next day, or we do them together, whatever it is. I'm just using that as an example, but I'm just saying, like, you have to have a clear, articulate way. Be precise in your speech. And that goes beyond relationships. That goes with if you're talking to your boss. Has your boss ever approached you to ask you a question and you're like, oh boy, I better answer this right, or I better not answer it in a way that upsets him. So let me figure this out. And then you end up just giving some gibberish to him, and now he's confused and it makes you look like a dum-dum. These things happen all the time. Be precise in your speech. There's a great example here. I want to read these whole chapters. I don't want to leave you out of the loop because I don't want you to be confused. There's this chapter which I think is interesting. It says here that when things break down, what has been ignored rushes in. When things are no longer specified with precision, the walls crumble, and chaos makes its presence known. When we've been careless and let things slide, what we have refused to attend to gathers itself up, adopts a serpentine form, and strikes, often at the worst possible moment. It is then that we see that focused intent, precision of aim, and careful attention protect us from. Imagine a loyal and honest wife suddenly confronted by evidence of her husband's infidelity. She has lived alongside him for years. She saw him as she assumes he is reliable, hardworking, loving, dependable. In her marriage, she is standing on a rock, or so she believes. But he becomes less attentive and more distracted. He begins, in a cliched manner, to work long hours. Small things she says and does irritate him, unjustifiably. One day she sees him in a downtown cafe with another woman, interacting with her in a manner difficult to rationalize and ignore. The limitations and inaccuracy of her former perceptions become immediately and painfully obvious. Her theory of her husband collapses. What happens? In consequence, first, someone emerges in his stead. A complex, frightening stranger. That's bad enough, but it's only half the problem. Her theory of herself collapses too. In the aftermath of betrayal, so that it's not one stranger, that's the problem, it's two. Her husband is not who she perceived him to be, but neither is she. The betrayed wife, she is no longer the well-loved, secure wife and valued partner. Strangely enough, despite our belief in the permanent immutability of the past, she may never have been. The past is not necessarily what it was, even though it has already been. The present is chaotic and indeterminate. The ground shifts continually around her feet and ours. Equally, the future, not yet here, changes into something it was not supposed to be. Is the once reasonably content wife now a deceived innocent or a gullible fool? Should she view herself as a victim or as a co-conspirator in a shared delusion? Her husband is, what? An unsatisfied lover? a target of seduction, a psychopathic liar, the very devil himself? How could he be so cruel? How could anyone? What is this home she has been living in? How could she be so naive? How could anyone? She looks in the mirror. Who is she? What's going on? Are any of her relationships real? Have any of them ever been? What has happened to the future? Everything is up for grabs. When the deeper realities of the world unexpectedly manifest themselves, everything is intricate beyond imagining. Everything is affected by everything else. We perceive a very narrow slice of a casually interconnected matrix, although we strive with all our might to avoid being confronted by knowledge of the narrowness. The thin veneer of perceptual sufficiency cracks. However, when something fundamental goes wrong, the dreadful inadequacy of our sense reveals itself. Our inadequacy of our senses reveal itself. Everything we hold dear crumbles to dust. We freeze. We turn to stone. What then do we see? Where can we look when it's precisely what we see that has been insufficient? What do we see when we don't know what we're looking at? What is it that is the world? Well, hold on. He goes on to this. He goes on to these other things. I'm going to skip ahead to what I believe he wraps up the lady, because he goes into a lot of variations of situations of that nature. But he finishing off this chapter, he says, here that here we go. I'll finish off here. The psyche, the soul, and the world are both organized in the high. I feel like this is a good closure of that last chat of what I just read. The psyche, the soul, and the world are both organized at the highest levels of human existence with language, thorough communication. Things are not as they appear when the outcome has been neither intended nor desired. Being has not been sorted into its proper categories when it's not behaving. When something goes wrong, even perception itself must be questioned, along with evaluation, thought, and action. When error announces itself, undifferentiated chaos is at hand. Its reptilian form paralyzes and confuses. But dragons, which do exist, perhaps more than anything else exists, also hoard gold. In that collapse into the terrible mess of uncomprehended being lurks the possibility of new and benevolent order, clarity of thought, courageous clarity of thought. It's necessary to call it forth. The problem itself must be admitted to, as close to the time of its emergence as possible. I'm unhappy is a good start. I've kind of spoke about this a second ago. Not I have a right to be unhappy, because that is still questionable at the beginning of the problem-solving process. Perhaps your unhappiness is justified under the current circumstances. Perhaps any reasonable person would be displeased and miserable to be where you are. Alternatively, perhaps you are just whiny and immature. Consider both at least equally probable, as terrible as such consideration might appear. Just exactly how immature might you be? There's a potentially bottomless pit, but at least you might rectify it. You can admit to it. We parse the complex tangled chaos and specify the nature of things, including ourselves. It is in this way that our creative, communicative exploration continually generates and regenerates the world. We are shaped and informed by what we voluntarily encounter, and we shape what we inhabit, as well in that encounter. This is difficult, but the difficulty is not relevant because the alternative is worse. Maybe our errant husband ignored the dinner conversation of his wife because he hated his job and was tired and resentful. Maybe he hated his job because his career was forced on him by his father, and he was too weak or loyal to object. Maybe she put up with his lack of attention because she believed that forthright objection itself was rude and immoral. Maybe she hated her own father's anger and decided when very young that all aggression and assertiveness were morally wrong. Maybe she thought her husband wouldn't love her if she had any opinions of her own. It's very difficult to put such things in order, but damaged machinery will continue to malfunction if its problems are neither diagnosed or fixed. Precision specifies. When something terrible happens, it is precision that separates the unique terrible thing that has actually happened from all the other, equally terrible things that might have happened, but did not. If you wake up in pain, you might be dying. You might be dying slowly and terribly from one of those diverse number of painful, horrible diseases. If you refuse to tell your doctor about your pain, then what you have is unspecified. It could be any of those diseases. And it certainly, since you have avoided the diagnostic conversation, the act of articulation, is something unspeakable. But if you talk to your doctor, all those terrible possible diseases will collapse, with luck, into just one terrible, or not so terrible, disease, or even into nothing. Then you can laugh at your previous fears. And if something is really wrong, well, you're prepared. Precision may leave the tragedy intact, but it chases away the ghouls and the demons. What you hear in the forest but cannot see might be a tiger. It might even be a conspiracy of tigers, each hungrier and more vicious than the other, led by a crocodile. But it might not be, too. If you turn and look, perhaps you'll see that it's a squirrel. I know someone who was actually chased by a squirrel, he says in parentheses. Hold on. Something is out there in the woods. You know that with certainty, but often it's only a squirrel. If you refuse to look, however, then it's a dragon, and you're no knight. You're a mouse confronting a lion, a rabbit paralyzed by the gaze of a wolf. And I'm not saying that it's always a squirrel. Often it's something truly terrible. But even what is terrible in actuality often pales in significance compared to what is terrible in imagination. And often what cannot be confronted because of its horror in imagination can in fact be confronted when reduced to its still admittedly terrible actuality. If you shirk the responsibility of confronting the unexpected, even when it appears in manageable doses, reality itself will become unsustainably disorganized and chaotic. Then it will grow bigger and swallow all order, all sense, and all predictability. Ignored reality transforms itself, reverts back into the great goddess of chaos, the great reptilian monster of the unknown, the great predatory beast against which mankind has struggled since the dawn of time. If the gap between pretense and reality goes unmentioned, it will widen. You will fall into it, and the consequences will not be good. Ignored reality manifests itself in the abyss of confusion and suffering. Be careful with what you tell yourself and others about what you have done, what you are doing, and where you are going. Search for the correct words. Organize those words in the correct sentences, and those sentences into the correct paragraphs. The past can be redeemed when reduced by precise language to its essence. The present can flow without robbing the future if its realities are spoken out clearly. With careful thought and language, the singular stellar destiny that justifies existence can be extracted from the multitude of murky and unpleasant futures that are far more likely to manifest themselves of their own accord. This is how the eye and the world and the word make habitable order. Don't hide baby monsters under the carpet. They will flourish. They will grow large in the dark, and then, when you least expect it, they will jump out and devour you. You will descend into an interdeterminate, confusing hell instead of ascending into the heaven of virtue and clarity. Courageous and truthful words will render your reality simple, pristine, well-defined, and habitable. If you identify things with careful attention and language, you bring them forward as viable, obedient objects, detaching them from their underlying near universal interconnectedness. You simplify them. You make them specific and useful, and reduce their complexity. You make it possible to live with them and use them without dying from that complexity, with its attendant uncertainty and anxiety. You leave things vague, then you'll never know what is one thing and what is another. Everything will bleed into everything else. This makes the world too complex to be managed. You have to consciously define the topic of conversation, particularly when it's difficult, or it becomes about everything. And everything is too much. This is so frequently why couples cease communicating. Every argument degenerates into every problem that have ever emerged in the past, every problem that exists now, and every terrible thing that is likely to happen in the future. No one can have a discussion about everything. Instead, you can say, this exact precise thing, this is what is making me unhappy. This exact precise thing is what I want as an alternative, although I'm open to suggestions if they are specific. This exact precise thing, this is what you could deliver, so that I will stop making your life and mine miserable. But to do that, you have to think, what is wrong exactly? What do I want exactly? You must speak forthrightly and call forth the habitable world from chaos. You must use honest, precise speech to do that. If you instead shrink away and hide, what you are hiding from will transform itself into the giant dragon that lurks under your bed and in your forest and in the darkest recesses of your mind, and it will devour you. You must determine where you have been in your life so that you can know where you are now. If you don't know where you are precisely, then you could be anywhere. Anywhere is too many places to be, and some of those places are very bad. You must determine where you have been in your life, because otherwise you can't get to where you're going. You can't get from point A to point B unless you are already at point A. And if you're just anywhere, the chances you are at point A are very small indeed. You must determine where you're going in life, because you cannot get there unless you move in that direction. Random wandering will not move you forward. It will instead disappoint and frustrate you and make you anxious and unhappy and hard to get along with, and then resentful, and then vengeful, and then worse. Say what you mean so that you can find out what you mean. Act out what you say so you can find out what happens. Then pay attention. Note your errors. Articulate them. Strive to correct them. That is how you discover the meaning of your life. That will protect you from the tragedy of your life. How could it be otherwise? Confront the chaos of being. Take aim against the sea of troubles. Specify your destination and chart your course. Admit to what you want. Tell those around you who you are. Narrow and gaze attentively and move forthrightly. Be precise in your speech. It's pretty deep, isn't it? And that's just part of that chapter. You know what I mean? I read you a couple paragraphs from that chapter. That's not the full chapter. So you get a really great sense of really what that book is all about. It's not a self-help book. It's not what you would think. And the rules, when you read them, are not merely what you think they would be. Sometimes you read it and you say, well, stand up straight. Okay, well, that makes sense. If I stand up straight, then, everybody will, I won't slouch and I won't look like I won't look bad in front of other people. But the reality of it is if you stand up straight, that actually releases chemicals in your body that help you to feel better. When you slouch and you have bad posture, it has the reverse effect of that. So standing up straight actually will help you. It will help you mentally. It's kind of, if you don't know this, chiropractic work is muscle and bones, but it's also very much neuro and brain function as well. And there are studies that show that if you go to a chiropractor and you get adjusted, even if your back's fine or your body's fine, there's studies that show that your brain function improves, your overall mental health improves. Sometimes they've found in children who misbehave or have erratic behavior that a chiropractic session can oftentimes lead to better neural functioning. So standing up straight is more than just looking good in front of other people. However, defeated people who have been beaten down, lost, and are essentially losers, maybe they have failed more than they've won, they tend to start to slouch more. Why? Because as you get defeated, your body breaks down. Part of breaking down means you're going to slouch. And whether we like to admit it or not, women can pick up on this. Men can pick up on this. Adults can see, judging by the way you stand and the way you walk into a room and the way you conduct yourself, people will immediately understand who you are, whether you're competent or incompetent, whether you're reliable or unreliable, just merely by looking at you. You could say, well, that's very judgmental, but it's the truth. If I shake your hand and I look you in the eye and you're looking at the floor, I could tell you're probably not confident. You could say, well, I have a condition. I have Asperger's. I can't look people in the eye. Fair enough. But now I know there's something wrong. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying I can't work with you. But I know instinctively that if I shake your hand and look you in the eye and you don't look me back at least look me at the face, you're looking at the ground, I know something's not right there. Everybody knows it instinctively. It's ingrained in you, either you want to admit it or not. These are things that you should do to help better yourself and help people see that you're trustworthy and reliable. Stand up straight. It'll help you feel better. And he goes into some really deep stuff in that first chapter, and it's very interesting. He talks about lobsters and all other kinds of stuff. Yeah, I know lobsters. Be precise in your speech. Seems easy enough. It seems obvious, but how often have you talked to somebody and thought, man, I could have probably have conveyed that a little bit better? Or how often have you gone to somebody or gone to anyone or thought about a problem and you just couldn't really quite piece it all together to figure out what the solution was or what it really was the problem? Is it me or is it them? Is it this? Is it that? You just don't really know. And so it never really gets solved. This is a problem that happens for everybody, including myself. This book really has helped me narrow in on the precision. It's like dialing myself in. That's kind of how I felt about it. I felt I was already really good. I mean, after I went to the U.S. Marine Corps, I had two really great parents. They raised me, and they taught me a lot of great things. And they raised me to be a great young man. And the United States Marine Corps took over and raised me to be a really great adult, a great leader, somebody that they instilled some good habits in me. And then this book, The 12 Rules for Life, I felt like was kind of a very interesting way of dialing in, kind of tweaking and getting yourself to where you really want to be a little bit better. And so I recommend this book to everybody. We touched on it a little bit. It was a long episode. We almost went 2 hours today. That's okay. I don't mind. Hopefully you don't either. And I could read this whole book to you. It's just so fascinating, all the information. And if you're not much of a reader, you can get this book on Audible. You can go online and listen to it. But if you're not interested in that either, you can check out Jordan B. Peterson on YouTube. He has a blog. He has a podcast as well. I strongly recommend the podcast if you love podcasts. And you can learn some things from him. He does his videos on YouTube of his lectures, I think, are the best. They're at the University of Toronto, where he is giving lectures on psychology. And he does it in a very fun and creative way, which is where he is breaking down, he'll break down the psychology of Disney movies, Star Wars, Marvel. He even goes deep into the psychology of the Bible. And he just breaks it down in such an interesting way that you're just not thinking about. You watch Pinocchio a million times, and he'll tell you the real meaning behind Pinocchio, and it'll just blow your mind. And it's like, what? I never would have thought about that, but it all makes sense. And you'll understand the kind of the reason why you love these stories is not really the reason why you think you do, right? So anyway, I on that note, I think it's a good way to wrap up for the day. And this is the book I recommend for February: 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos, by Jordan B. Peterson. And I definitely recommend you check it out, listen to it, read it. Go to his website, jordanbpeterson.com. And I look forward to being back to you guys later this week. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next time. Goodbye.
Emotional damage.